Welcome to the 2021 Virtual Spaceport America Cup. This special online event marks the culmination of this year's academic competition. Despite many challenges and obstacles, teams from across the globe will present their rocket designs, analytical prowess, innovation, and teamwork. This event will include keynote speakers, amateur rocketry technical presentations, student presentations, and much more. Top teams will be eligible for the technical prizes, but only one team will win the coveted Spaceport America Cup prize.
Hello and welcome to the 4th Annual Spaceport America Cup. My name is Scott McLaughlin and I'm the Executive Director of Spaceport America. We are so pleased to be able to put this on this year. Of course, we canceled last year. We knew we had to do something even with the COVID restrictions, so we are very happy to be able to put this on with Ezra, and thank you for participating. We appreciate your support of the Cup in this new format. We do hope that we'll be able to do future hybrid events, so this has been a great learning experience for all of us. The next 3 days are going to be interesting. A new format. We're going to learn from each other. You are going to learn from each other. This will be a nice sharing of ideas and help grow rocketry for Ezra for this competition. So we're hoping that it improves our knowledge and our expertise as we move forward. So I want to thank my staff for the great work they've done. Alice, Susan, Chris, Chaz, and others who you'll see over the next few days. I want to thank Ezra for all the work they've done. You'll see many of them. And I want to especially thank our guest speakers. We really appreciate you guys participating, all of you. It's very important, especially for the students, to be able to hear from some of the greats of the industry, people who have made a difference, people who have strong opinions about how things should go in the future. I think it's great that we're able to have everybody come together in this way. And I want to thank our sponsors. Without the sponsors, we couldn't do this. So appreciate that. This is going to be a great event. You'll be able to search for jobs. You'll be able to learn about rocketry. And a lot of you who aren't graduating, sorry for those who are, will be able to get ready for next year. So for now, I'd like to hand it over to Cliff Olmsted. Thanks and have a great event.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Scott, and thank you to Spaceport America. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm very excited that you can be here with us. Again, my name is Cliff Olmsted. I'm the president of the Experimental Sounding Rocket Association, or just ESRA for short, and we've got a great weekend lined up for you. This has been a long road to get here. I know with all kinds of technical issues, but a lot of hard work that's gone over the course of the past year in preparing for this event. So really excited. And if you didn't know, there's 16 different countries that are participating in the Cup this year, 75 different teams altogether from 6 continents across the globe. We've got teams all over the place from Australia and India and the Middle East. We've got teams in Europe and, of course, a very large number of teams from the United States. So welcome, very glad you can be here. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to our sponsors. We couldn't have this event without you. And please do make sure to go to the Expo section of the website in your downtime and visit with the sponsors. You can chat with them. There's opportunities to share your information with them for recruiting possibilities. They're looking for people and they certainly want to get in contact with you. Also, so over the course of the weekend, we've got really some exciting speakers. Today, I'll be introducing Mike Mullane, and tomorrow we have Wayne Monteith, who's the FAA Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation. And also on Sunday, that's Jamil Janjua, who's a Virgin Galactic test pilot. They'll all be here in the morning with us, kicking off the day. Very exciting. Thank you for being here with us. And another significant, huge shout out is to everyone on ESRA. If you didn't know, ESRA is entirely volunteer run. It's a nonprofit organization, and all of the work that goes on to host the event and get the teams together and the judging in particular and evaluating all of the work that you've done, it's entirely volunteer. And so me personally, on behalf of the board of directors, to all of the volunteers that have been with us for ESRA, thank you. I'm just very humbled by the commitment you've provided. And so just a little overview of the agenda for the weekend. There's lots of activity happening. Certainly the teams have their poster sessions. There's going to be podium sessions and also payload review sessions. That's all the technical content as part of the competition. But there's also a number of presentations that are being given that cover a huge range of topics, from the technical aspects of amateur rocketry, as well as a number of speaker events by our sponsors. So for example, today there's a session that will be conducted by Virgin Galactic. And tomorrow we have both AIAA and Honeywell. They are providing some great content, and be sure to join them. And we have Siemens as well. So look through the agenda. You'll see main stage events, and you can also see breakout sessions for those all those different events, and you can click and join them at the time that they show up. Be sure to bookmark them. You'll get notifications when they're starting. And let's walk through, for those not familiar, with the awards for this event. And so we've got a number of awards. In fact, we have a new award this year, which is the Cron Video Challenge Award. So a number of teams have submitted videos. We're reviewing those now. That will be part of the award ceremony on Sunday. Be sure to tune in and join us for that. And this is one that's very close to Ezra, and a shout out to Oregon State University. We've had the Team Spirit Award for a while, and in honor of Nancy Squires, who was an outstanding professor at Oregon State University, and also a great mentor to Ezra and to me personally, we've renamed the Team Spirit Award to the Nancy Squires Team Spirit Award, and I'm just very moved that we can do that. So very exciting. Other awards are the Team Sportsmanship Award, and then we have the Payloads Award with FFL. We've got the Jim Furfaro Award for Technical Excellence, the Dr. Gil Moore Award for Innovation, the Charles Holt Award for Modeling and Simulation, and the one that everybody's waiting for, the overall Virtual Spaceport America Cup Award. And so a couple of announcements before we show one last little video that I think you might like. A reminder for teams. Things are moving fast. So poster sessions are now going to be via Zoom. If you weren't aware, the teams that submitted videos that are their poster session videos and the email contacts that you provided, those emails will get a link to the Zoom session. And I'll just mention too, there's a number of teams that are still struggling to get logged on and get their tickets sorted. And as soon as I get done here, I'll be helping our technical team to make sure we get all of this tickets issues resolved and everybody on board. So really appreciate your patience. I know that's been a little bit tough, but let's take a break before I introduce Mike, and let's see what those trophy awards look like.
Wow. Oh,
I'm pumped. I'm so excited. I love that video. That's great. So remember, award ceremony is Sunday, so be sure that you join us for that. It's going to be fantastic. And now it's really my pleasure. I'm very excited to introduce Mike Mullane, who's a former NASA astronaut. He's joined us today for our keynote speech. And Mike, I'll just hand it right over to you.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Let me get my PowerPoint up here and we'll roll.
Great, and I can hear you just fine.
Okay, do you see my PowerPoint there?
I do see your screen.
Okay, so I think we're go for launch. Thank you, Cliff, for that intro, and I would like to salute the entire Spaceport America team for putting all of this together. It's a thrilling program, and it's going to inspire a lot of young people out there to do great things in space in the future. And I'd like to make my contribution to the team effort here with a program on the astronaut experience, in which I'm going to talk about a number of topics. Hold on a second. I'm going to give you my life story, my pathway into orbit, some good life lessons there that I want all you young engineers out there, you men and women, to take away and hopefully help you along the way on your pursuit toward whatever dreams you might be pursuing. I'm also going to, as a title addresses, I'm going to talk about what it's like to be an astronaut and fly in space. And I want to briefly touch on the future of spaceflight. So let's begin. I want to take you into orbit vicariously here with this video. Around 3 hours before liftoff, well, this for a space shuttle launch, we would walk to the crew van, drive to the launch pad, take the elevator to the cockpit level, walk across the access arm. What do you think your heart rate is right about there? I'll tell you, it's choking you. In the white room, we would dress in our harnesses. Then we get down on our hands and knees and crawl into the cockpit. There'll be technicians inside who help lay us back into our chairs. They will strap us to those chairs. And then as they leave, they would close the side hatch, the access arm would be retracted, and we would be left alone. And while we're awaiting launch, we're going to be in the grips of two fundamental emotions, one of which is fear, gut fear. You will, well, at least I did, feared for my life out on that launch pad, and I think most astronauts do. But at the same time that fear is on us, we're going to be boundlessly joyful, because for most astronauts, it truly is a lifetime quest to make this flight. And with that at hand, we're going to be overwhelmed with joy. Now, T-minus 6 seconds, the 3 liquid engines started. When that occurred, we got this heavy vibration in the cockpit. At T0, the hold down bolts blew. There were 4 explosive bolts on the skirts of each of these solid rocket boosters, holding the rocket to the pad while those 3 liquid engines came up to speed and were checked out by computers. Then when the command was issued to explode the hold down bolts, simultaneously the command was issued to ignite the solid rocket boosters. And at that point, we were slapped into our seats with a force of about 2 Gs, 2 times gravity, as the rocket leaped off the launch pad. 2 minutes and 12 seconds up, the boosters burned out and separated. When that occurred, we heard a loud bang. We saw a whip of fire across the windscreens as these boosters were explosively separated. And then it got dead quiet, like a light switch. For another 6.5 minutes, we continued running into space on those 3 liquid-fueled engines, burning gas out of that big orange gas tank. But from here on up, it was very smooth, very quiet, no vibrations, no noise. It was, one astronaut likened it to being pushed into orbit electrically because it was so quiet. The only way you could tell you're really moving, besides look at your instruments, were the G-forces slowly rising on your body, and those G-forces ultimately stabilized at 3 Gs, 3 times the force of gravity. 8.5 minutes up, excuse me, 8.5 minutes up, the autopilot shut off the engines, the gas tank was empty. It was jettisoned to burn up in the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean. All that remained now headed to orbit was the winged vehicle. We called that the orbiter, and now we're on our way to the International Space Station. Now, I made this trip into space 3 times in my astronaut career. However, I never got to the International Space Station because I left NASA in 1990 after my 3rd shuttle mission, and the first piece of the International Space Station wasn't launched until 8 years later in 1998. Now, I want to tell you my life story, how I ended up aboard a space shuttle as an astronaut. Early in my life, I had an intense fascination with all things associated with airplanes. And there's no doubt in my mind where that fascination came from my father. My father was a World War II aviator. After the war, he stayed in the new Air Force at the time, the new U.S. Air Force, flying on cargo airplanes. And so my brothers and I, we were always surround airplanes and hearing stories about airplanes. So I had this intense fascination with all things related to aviation. That fascination was supplemented with an intense fascination on all things related to space when the space race started. I was 12 years old in 1957 when Sputnik was launched, and I was all in the space race. I wanted to be one of these guys. I wanted to be a John Glenn or an Alan Shepard and ride rocket ships into space. This is my science fair project from that era on how rockets might one day parachute back to Earth from space. Now, I was growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time, and there was a vast desert right outside my door where I could indulge my interest in homemade rocketry. Here's one of my successful launches, and here's one of my rockets parachuting, capsules, if you will, parachuting back to Earth. By the way, my capsule was a empty Maxwell House coffee can with a piece of acetate taped into a pointy shape as a nose cone. And I used the plastic from the dry cleaners that covered clothes as a parachute with some kite string scotch tape to it. So it was a very low budget space program here. Here I am recovering one of those rockets from the deserts of near Albuquerque. By the way, let me move on here. I want to make a point here. In my era, we did not have the organized rocket clubs and the rocket education that you folks are getting through Spaceport America and these other folks out there. And that's really important. When I look back on my life, what I was doing was very, very dangerous with homemade rockets, steel rockets, and homemade mixed up propellants. It was incredibly dangerous. And you never want to do that, folks. Continue your learning about rocketry, doing exactly what you're doing now, getting involved with organizations that know the science and know the safety of rocket testing. Okay, I had to write a report for my science fair project. I was a sophomore in high school at the time, and I want to share with you the first two sentences of this report. The first sentence reads, today, and I was writing this in 1960, this country and many others throughout the world are steadily working toward the conquest of space. Then I continued in my second sentence and wrote, someday I also plan to participate in this great undertaking. I was 14 years old when I wrote that sentence. 25 years later, at age 39, I'm aboard the shuttle on my rookie space shuttle flight. Now, that is a dream come true by any human's definition. And I suspect that right now, many of you are thinking it happened for me because I was different than you, that I was born a super kid, that I was exceptional in all regards, that I was a genius child, had incredible talents, and that made it easy for me to become an astronaut. Well, let's look deeper into that. This is my high school senior graduation entry in the yearbook, okay, senior. Down in ambition, it says, I wanted to attend the Air Force Academy. I couldn't get into the Air Force Academy. My grades weren't good enough. West Point, the Army Academy, took me, which frankly doesn't say a lot about West Point, does it? But in all fairness to West Point, I was a third alternate for my congressional district. I barely made it into West Point. And at graduation from West Point, I wasn't on the stage getting awards for academic excellence. So Destiny did not have genius to work with. Let me show you a few other things Destiny struggled with. This is the varsity club, the star athletes in my high school. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not in this picture because I was no star athlete. I didn't have that talent. And I think this slide, more than any other slide for my youth, says what Destiny had in teenage Mike Mullane. These are the dedication pages for my senior high school yearbook. I have one dedication, just one, and it reads, you missed Korea, but here's hoping you make the Vietnam War. What does that say about popularity? Obviously, Destiny didn't have popularity to work with. So it does beg the question, how in the world did this geeky, nerdy, or ordinary kid really end up being an astronaut? Well, looking back now in hindsight, I didn't know it at the time. I had a couple things going for me that made up for the lack of genius and all these other talents. And one was my interests from a very young age were focused on rocketry and aviation. I didn't have any doubt what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Whatever the dimmest age is that we can begin to perceive that there's something we're going to be doing in the future, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to be involved in rocketry and aviation in some way. Dreamed about being a test pilot, being an astronaut maybe, but definitely, positively, absolutely, I was going to be involved in engineering and in these rockets, rocket planes and rockets out there. Another thing I had going for me, I was a passionate goal setter. Oh, by the way, on that very first bullet there about being wildly curious about aviation and space, that was a blessing of the first magnitude. I didn't realize how exceptional it is when young kids have such an intense focus. And I hope I'm describing all of you. I hope all of you have that same intense focus. It really is a huge dividend in life. Most kids don't have it. None of my children have it. And I realize now very few children have it, I say children, young adults have it, where they really know what they want to do. And when you know what you want to do and focus all your energy, boy, that pays huge dividends in life. You don't drift around wondering. Okay, but I was also a passionate goal setter, and I had an abundance of tenacity, and that tenacity made a huge difference in my life. And I'll tell you where I learned it from. I learned it from my parents. My dad, as I said, was a World War II aviator. He survived the war, came back to live the American, got married in the middle of the war, by the way, to my mom when she was 18 years old. Survived the war, came home to live the American dream with my mom. But then at age 33 in 1955, he was crippled for life with polio. Never again walked, spent the rest of his life on crutches and braces in a wheelchair. He was discharged from the military, discharged from the Air Force at that point. At this point in my parents' lives, here's a guy, 33 years old, has 6 kids, and now he's confined to a wheelchair for life. And that could have gone down very, very ugly. But my parents were courageous self-leaders. They kept their eye laser focused on the mission, on the goal, and their goal was raising these 6 kids. And they had enormous tenacity to push through the obstacles that polio put in front of them to achieve this goal of raising this family. Now, I was only 10 years old when all this was happening. I had no clue I was being imprinted with this fierce sense of tenacity, of not giving up, of continually hammering away at a goal. And that paid huge dividends in my life, that tenacity, because I needed every bit of that to survive West Point. West Point was by far the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Just 4 years of unrelenting of challenges in all regard, leadership challenges, academic, athletic challenges. Many a day I'd wake up and think, I can't do this. There's no way I can do this. And at the end of the day, I look back and see I had done it. And that paid huge dividends later in my life, developing this self-confidence and this tenacity. I graduated in West Point in 1967. I took my commission in the U.S. Air Force. I wanted to be a pilot, a test pilot, and maybe someday be an astronaut. But fate intervened here. When I entered flight training, my eyesight was poor. I could not be a fighter pilot. I ended up flying in the back seat of the F-4 Phantom fighter type of jet. Now, at this point, my dream of being an astronaut was over, because at that point in 1968, NASA was only hiring test pilots to be astronauts. And if I wasn't a pilot, I couldn't be a test pilot. In 1969, I continued my career, my Air Force career. In 1969, I went to Vietnam in that war. I was flying at that point in the back seat of the reconnaissance version of the Phantom jet. We'd fly alone over enemy targets, photographing enemy targets before they were hit by fighters or bombers and hit afterwards. That was the mission of the photo reconnaissance. Had a couple other assignments in the Air Force, but ultimately went to graduate school. This was another watershed moment in my life, to get a master's degree in aeronautical engineering. And I'll tell you right now, I was terrified at the thought of going back to school. I really thought I'd bit off more than I could chew with this. But I did go. I did get the master's degree in aeronautical engineering. Later, went to another very tough course called the Test Pilot School. They have a backseater course there, very tough course. And then I went into weapons testing from there. And it was while I was at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida doing weapons testing aboard fighter type of aircraft that NASA announced that they were selecting astronauts for the new space shuttle program. And a significant point of that announcement was they had a new crew position called Mission Specialist Astronaut. They did not require you to be a pilot to apply for. I immediately applied to be a Mission Specialist Astronaut on the shuttle. Mission specialists were the people that would do experiments, release satellites, do spacewalks, things like that. I immediately put in an application, and I was fortunate enough to get selected in the first group of space shuttle astronauts in 1978. Now, there's some very important life lessons I want to pass on to you young men and women out there that you can use in your life to make sure your dreams, whatever they might be, might someday happen. And one is right here: do your best all the time at everything. It's gonna count. A lot of people, young people, think, oh, I don't need to worry about this. It's never going to count. It will count. It counts in all regards. Do your best. Let me take you back to this moment in 1968 when I was flying in the back of those fighters thinking, I'm never going to be an astronaut. I'm not a pilot. Well, 10 years, I did my best. I poured heart and soul into everything I was doing as an engineer, going to school, learning, as a backseater in the Phantom jets. I did my best at everything. And then 10 years later, what happened? I found out it all counted because the rules changed. NASA was selecting astronauts who did not have to be pilot for the mission specialist position. So just remember that. Do your best at everything. We can't see our futures, but I'll tell you right now, there's going to be opportunities to develop in each and every one of your lives that if you're doing your best now and forever at everything, you'll be able to capitalize on that opportunity and have great things happen. Do your best. Another thing is we're better than we think. West Point opened my eyes to that. I learned that in a great way at West Point. I was constantly being challenged, and I would be surprised at what I was capable of doing. So know now that you're better than you think. So dream big, set very lofty goals for yourself. Don't be timid. You can do some amazing things when you direct that focus and tenacity on a goal. Be tenacious, definitely. Don't give up the first time you hit a speed bump on a way toward a goal. And don't be afraid of failure. I think a lot of us have this sense, well, I don't want to try that, I might fail. Well, if you don't try, you fail by definition. I love Michael Jordan's quote on this topic of don't be afraid of failure. Michael Jordan is an NBA Hall of Fame former basketball player, right? So he said, I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Think about that. He failed his way into the NBA Hall of Fame. He realized that each time he failed at something, he learned something he could apply to the next game, the next drive, the next pass, the next shot. And so he failed his way into the NBA Hall of Fame. So don't be afraid of failure, folks. Challenge yourself. Again, you'll be amazed at what you're capable of doing. Obviously, nothing to be said here. You get one body in life and you're going to need it for your dream. So guard it, take care of it, and make your education priority number one. Education opens doors. Get as much education as you possibly can and be a team player and learn how to be an inspiring team leader. That's what is valued at NASA. That's what's valued in the corporate world, the military. They want people who can join a team and work together with people who are entirely different than them toward a common goal, and people who can lead a team of diversity of different people, ethnic backgrounds and gender and color and religion and all these things. Pull them together, inspire them toward a common goal. That's what NASA wants. That's what the military wants, and that's what the corporate world wants. So make sure you develop those skills. Okay, let's move on here now and talk about the space flight experience, talk about what I did in space. My first mission in 1984, it was the very first flight aboard the shuttle Discovery. We took up 3 of these communication satellites to release. I'm going to tell you something that happened on that mission. We start these 3 liquid-fueled engines 6 seconds early because they can be checked by computer and shut off if there's a problem. Whereas once those solid rocket boosters ignited, there's no going back. So during that 6 seconds, while it's being held to the pad with those hold-down bolts, the computers are checking them. Well, on 11 previous times before my flight, they passed all their checks. The solid rocket boosters ignited, the hold-down bolts blew, and the rocket flew. Well, on our flight, though, I'm watching the digits flicker off that countdown clock. 7, 6, main engine start, get this heavy vibration in the cockpit. 5, 4. I remember thinking, well, whatever happens, I'm going now. 3, silence. All 3 of the engines shut off. One of them was sick. The computers did exactly what they were designed to do. They shut them all off. The launch was aborted. That got our attention. Definitely a fear factor there. We had trained for this, but it had been a while, and so it kind of got us by surprise there. But what really jacked up the fear factor in that cockpit was the word fire. The ground reported seeing a fire at the base of the vehicle. And boy, when you're sitting on 4 million pounds of propellant, that is scary to hear that word. We thought for a while that we were going to have to escape from the cockpit of the shuttle by ourselves to get away from this fire. And to show how we did not have to do this. Ultimately, they got the fire out and we got out of the cockpit the normal way. But you might wonder what would have happened had we had to escape. Well, we would have run across the access arm, open the hatch ourselves, run across the access arm, jump in these baskets that are slide down a 1/4 mile long wire. They're trapped by a chain and net down at the bottom. We would have jumped out of those baskets and then run into an underground bunker to wait out whatever the problem was on the launch pad. But as I said, they turned on the fire suppression system, got the fire out, and we came back to launch about, I guess it was 2 months later. We got up on our first launch aboard Discovery. Now, there's an engineering lesson, obviously, in this story, and that is plan for failure. I mean, we got these integrated systems. Everybody involved in an integrated system like this, spacecraft should, or any integrated machine or whatever, should be planning for failure and how you might overcome failures using other parts of the system, integrated system. We would spend hours and hours and hours on this in these simulations at NASA between, even though we were in simulators in Houston on the ground, it was just like being in the cockpit of a shuttle, and then mission control was integrated, electronically integrated, while instructors put in malfunctions to fail various systems and stress the team on reacting on how they can employ other systems to help save the mission. And we spent hundreds of hours doing that. Spacewalks, same way. NASA's world class at training. For spacewalks, they put you underwater, and it simulates very closely the difficulty of working in weightlessness. Prepare you for spacewalks. For robot arm, which I did on one of my missions, robot arm operations, they had this gigantic helium-filled balloon where we could practice lifting that balloon up as if it was a weightless payload, so we could do the same task up in orbit. Now they have CGI, computer-generated imagery, that's much more enhanced than what we had in our era. So I'm sure all of this is being done in through computer-generated images rather than having a big helium balloon as we did in my era. Show you how thorough NASA is about training. We have a toilet trainer actually. This is a popular question. I get it all the time. How does our space toilet work? And talk about a tough engineering problem. This was one. But let me just tell you how this thing operates. It's basically a vacuum cleaner. We can't have water in our toilet, so we use air to collect waste. That's the urinal right there. It's Velcroed out of the way for launch. There's different shaped funnels that twist on the end of the urinal for males and females to use. The urine is sucked down that hose and held in a tank, or this is all for the shuttle. It was held in a tank. When that tank got full, we dumped the urine through external ports into space. And that was beautiful to watch because the urine would freeze into a glitter of ice crystals. It was magnificent to look at frozen urine floating around up in space. Trust me on this. Solid waste was collected through that opening. There was air flowing in and down, pulling the waste away from your body down inside that big container. When you were done, you took that lever, you moved it back, it slid a cover across the opening, and it trapped solid waste below. Solid waste was returned to Earth on the space shuttle. Those look like handles. Those red arrows pointing there, those look like handles. It's not handles. They're not handles. They were thigh restraints. You pulled these up against a spring force. You twisted them in. The spring force would clamp you on the toilet to keep you from floating off. You don't want to float off your toilet in space. Now, there's a reason I'm telling this story about from an engineering point of view and about how making sure that you have systems that support the whole integrated machine or spacecraft, whatever it is. As I said, we dumped this urine into space. Well, during one of our urine dumps, the ground noticed that there was a temperature. They saw a temperature on a sensor on the port, and they suspected the urine wasn't spewing out. It was freezing to the side of the vehicle, which could be very dangerous. And they wanted us to take a look. So they employed the robot arm. Obviously, it was never designed to have any interface with the toilet. But they used that robot arm, which has a camera on the end of it. And it's normally used for payload deployments and stuff like that. Well, they sent up instructions to bend it at a weird angle and reach down around the port side of the orbiter and take a look. And sure enough, they saw this big block of urine ice frozen to the side of the orbiter. It was dangerous because engineers feared on reentry it would break off, fly back and hit the tail tiles and the heat tiles and maybe gouge those out and endanger us on entry. We could have the tail burn off on reentry and be killed by our own urine, which hardly is a very something you really want to have on your tombstone. So the engineers wanted that off there. It would not melt. I won't go into the chemistry of that, but it's sublimation. Things in liquid water doesn't exist in a vacuum of space. It goes from a solid to a gas, and that's a slow process called sublimation. So they couldn't melt it off, so they wanted it off, and they used the robot arm to reach down and knock it off. And here it is floating around up in space. A block of yellow ice up there. I'm sure it's long ago sublimated. But again, the engineering lesson here is how other systems can be used to support the failure of another system. By the way, in our particular case, another engineering lesson here, and a lesson for astronauts, is be adaptable, because once they got the ice off, we couldn't use the urinal function of the toilet, so we had to pee in plastic bags. That's a mess and weightlessness, so we had to use socks shoving these plastic bags to absorb the urine. It was, trust me, it's not something that they didn't teach this at astronaut school. We had to adapt to this when we were faced with this. But anyway, moving away from toilets, but it was a good engineering lesson, you have to agree. Let me tell you about my STS-27 mission, my second mission, which was a military mission in which I used the robot arm to release a military payload. It wasn't this payload. I can't show that. It's a classified secret military payload. But this is Hubble Space Telescope here. I had nothing to do with Hubble Space Telescope. It's just representative of what I did using the robot arm to release that military satellite. Now, let me tell you something that happened on this mission that has engineering ramifications. During launch, the tip of the right side solid rocket booster structurally failed, broke off, flew back, and hit the lower right starboard side of the vehicle, and ultimately severely damaged a bunch of heat tiles as a result of that strike. All that white you see there, those are scars left by tiles that have been gouged by the impact of the debris from that tip of that right side solid rocket booster. Now, we didn't see this incident, didn't feel or hear anything during launch. Ground saw it on cameras from the Michigan launch control team. Mission control team saw it on playback of cameras that observed the launch. So they suspected we'd been hit. And with the camera on the end of the robot arm, I was a robot arm operator. They sent me instructions to use the robot arm for something that was never intended. It's hard to imagine how that was going to ever interface with the thermal protection system on the orbiter. But we were able to reach around with that camera and survey the damage. And we saw, you can see all of those white scars now are damaged heat tiles in a part of the orbiter that sees about 2,500 degrees on reentry. Those tiles are about 6 inches thick. And you can see the scars of some of the damage. Ultimately, they had to change out, I think it was close to 800 heat tiles that were so severely damaged, had to be changed after the mission. But this is what scared us the most, is we saw one tile that was completely missing. You're looking straight into the heat shield there, about 6 inches deep, and you could see the it's just probably a quarter inch from all that charring and stuff you see down there to the aluminum skin of the orbiter. So it very narrowly avoided a burn through into the fuselage of the orbiter, which would have been catastrophic, would have resulted in the loss of the vehicle and death of all of us aboard. On reentry, that area, as I said, sees about 2,500 degree heat. The shuttle reenters 40 degrees nose high. The friction of air friction at the tremendous speeds we're re-entering at causes this plasma to form, and it wraps around the orbiter in a wake. And if you look out the overhead windows, you can see this vortex of superheated plasma, 3,000 degrees, trailing off into infinity. So that's what that heat shield has to protect you against. And now we're re-entering with it compromised, with tiles damaged and one completely missing. Fortunately, it held together and we re-entered safely, unlike what happened to the Columbia space shuttle 15 years later. STS-103, 2003, during its launch, debris hit its debris, in this case foam, insulating foam falling off that gas tank, hit the heat shield on Columbia. And what happened there is it hit the leading edge of the left wing, with those areas, the nose and leading edges of the wing, see 3,000 degrees heat on reentry. And now you hit that carbon panel, and that carbon is much more brittle than those silica heat tiles. The silica that were hit on our mission are much more robust than the carbon panels that cover the leading edge of the wing of the nose. And in tests done after, we call our orbiter, by the way, a glass rocket because of this heat shield with the silica and the carbon panels. But in tests that were done after Columbia's loss, they fired foam from air cannons into these carbon panels, and in one test blasted a 16-inch diameter hole. They estimate on Columbia's reentry, the hole was 9 inches in diameter. That was enough for this 3,000 degree plasma to enter into the left wing, melt the left wing off, and cause the destruction of the orbiter Columbia and the deaths of the 7 astronauts. Now, here's a very important engineering lesson for all of you out there. After a near miss, make sure you take away the correct lesson. Basically, the same event is a very near miss for us, ultimately 15 years later, killed the Columbia crew. Now, the lessons that could have been taken away from Flight 27, my mission, was that the shuttle, you could take away the lesson, hey, this heat shield is really robust. It can take a hit and still bring you home safely. That's one lesson that could be taken away. There's also another lesson that could have been taken away, that it proved the vulnerability of the heat shield to a catastrophic debris strike. Unfortunately, looking back on it, I think most of us took away the first lesson, that the heat shield was much more robust than we thought. And unfortunately, as a result, people didn't address 15 years earlier the same issue that ultimately would kill the Columbia crew. Didn't address it properly. There should have been looking at all threats to impact on that heat shield after our mission. So make sure, as an engineer, you take away the right lesson when you see a failure, or a near miss, I should say. When you see a near miss. Okay, STS-36, my third mission, was another military mission. It was in 1990, and I can't talk about that mission at all. I left NASA then after this mission in 1990. Now, let me give you a little glimpse of space physiology, what happens to the human body once we get up in space. There, obviously, if you have long hair, ladies, you're going to have a bad hair day up in space, but there's a couple immediate effects on the human body up there. One of which is space sickness. About half the astronauts were suffering this space sickness and vomiting for a day or two, or even up to a week or more. Now, nobody could figure out what this caused this. It was not correlatable to Earth motion sickness. In other words, if you got seasick, car sick, plane sick here on Earth, it would not predict whether you're going to get space sick. You may not. And I'm a classic example of that. I have filled hundreds of barf bags in the back of those fighter jets. I was very, very airsick many times flying in those fighters. And yet up in space, I had no symptoms of space sickness. And then we had test pilots who have never been motion sick in their life go in space and vomit for a days or a week. So nobody could figure out what caused it. And ultimately, they just went to injectable anti-nausea drugs to stop people from vomiting up there. But unfortunately, those are the type of drugs that have bad side effects like drowsiness and stuff like that. But better that than be incapacitated by vomiting. Another thing that happens up there is you grow taller. There's a lot of blood and fluid biased in our body by gravity. It's biased in lower parts of our body. In weightlessness, it's equally distributed through our bodies. In fact, if you look at pictures of astronauts in orbit, you might notice their eyes are kind of puffy, their faces are kind of puffy. That's because this migration of fluid is equalizing in the body, and so it's moving up. So the result is kind of a puffier face, bigger chest, smaller waist, smaller hips and or thighs, smaller calves as this weight is distributed, or this fluid is distributed. Now, one of the things that happens though is the vertebrae, that the discs that separate our vertebrae absorb that fluid and push the vertebrae apart and make you taller. I was 1.5 inches taller in space than I am right now. Problem with that is it gives you a severe lower backache because the muscles of the lower back don't stretch right away to accommodate this longer spine, and you get a really bad backache as a result. And that lasts, I'm told, about a month. I re-entered on all my longest mission was 6 days, and on all of my missions I had a backache the whole time. But I'm told by astronauts who've been up there for longer that about a month later their bodies are finally feeling like they're adjusted to weightlessness. So there's a couple of the physiological effects. Yeah, if you have long hair, ladies, you definitely are going to have a bad hair day up there. Okay, let's talk about space habitability. How do you sleep up there? Well, we have sleeping bags we zip ourselves into. The gentleman in the foreground is not asleep. He's holding his hands because when you fall asleep, what you see in the background occurs. Your arms float out in front of your face. And that is so weird to wake up in the middle of a sleep period and look around and see people asleep with their arms floating out in front of them, look like they're in suspended animation, like on some sci-fi flick. How did we eat up there? This is peanut M&M baseball. There's the pitch, a swing, a high fly to left field. Two outfielders run out for it and crash together. This is one way to eat a banana. By the way, you never play with your food like this. Eat it out of the air when people are vomiting in that cockpit. You're liable to eat something that's already been eaten. It's disgusting up there when people are vomiting. How do we eat up there besides fresh food like that and candy? We take dehydrated food. Camping food is almost what it's like. If you ever go backpacking as a Boy Scout or something, you might take dehydrated food. Well, ours is just packaged different. This is dehydrated strawberries. The machine pierced the plastic, squirted water underneath the plastic to rehydrate this. And then you just mix the food and water together by running your fingers over that plastic covering, cut off the plastic, peel it back, and eat with a fork and spoon like you would eat here on Earth. Got to eat slow in space, though, or you have food flying everywhere. This is a burrito made with dehydrated eggs and a dehydrated sausage patty and a tortilla. We tried taking bread up in space for sandwiches, like peanut butter sandwiches, things like that, but it crumbled too easy, so they went to tortillas, which work a lot better. In this case, this guy used his tortilla to make a burrito. How do we drink up there? This is one way to try it. You notice the surface tension causes fluids to stick, which is really fascinating. Everybody was fascinated to see fluids floating around in the cockpit. At least some fluids. Again, you see some other fluids you wish you hadn't seen. At any rate, how do we drink up there? If I gave you a glass in weightlessness and you went to drink it, what's going to happen? Nothing. This is hard to get your head around. It really is. it's hard for astronauts, is that in space, in weightlessness, every position is identical. There's no up, down, dropping, spilling, sitting, lying. Those are all words we have in our vocabulary because we live in a gravity vector. You take that vector away and you're weightless in space, those have no meaning whatsoever. You can't pour, you can't drop, you can't spill, you can't sit, you can't lay down. All you do is float. So if you had a glass of water and you did this, nothing's going to change. You'll be looking at the water, wondering how you're going to get it. So we had these foil bags with various powders in them that we could fill with either hot or cold water, depending on the beverage, and put a straw in it in the end of the bag and suck from a straw. You had to suck to drink up in space. You couldn't pour anything into your mouth. Here's a guy throwing M&Ms into a ball of water. Again, the surface tension aspect here is fascinating to watch, how things want to stick to water. And in fact, remember that first, that's how we do our time. Remember that video I showed of the guy sticking his head into that water ball? Yeah, it's funny, okay, yeah, but I'll tell you, that almost killed somebody on a spacewalk a couple years ago. I think it was a ESA, a European Space Agency astronaut, I believe, Italian astronaut, I think, who was doing a spacewalk. And on a spacewalk, you know, you have a lot of exhalation of sweat and water vapor coming out of your lungs, and so they have a dehydration system, water scrubber, if you will, a dehumidifier that will take that water, scrubs it out of the air inside the spacesuit so it doesn't fog over the visors. And that water is supposed to then be ultimately pushed into, or just dumped into space. Well, they had a malfunction in the spacesuit they were unaware of that was allowing this water to accumulate in the system. And just on that spacewalk, there was a failure that resulted in the release of that water into the helmet. So now imagine you can't get this stuff away from you. I mean, it's floating around. You can shake it off, and it's going to ultimately cover your face again. And this guy was swallowing this disgusting fluid to clear an airway so he could breathe. Fortunately, he was also covering the microphone in his earphone, so he's having a hard time communicating. But fortunately, they always spacewalk in pairs as a buddy system. So the buddy saw what was happening and hustled him into the airlock so they could get his helmet off. But boy, nobody, can you imagine that? Imagine a risk of drowning in a spacesuit. Who would have ever thought that was a risk? Well, it was there. So it is amazing. If there's a failure mode, the gods of failure up there will find it and activate it at some point. That's why you have to constantly be preparing engineering systems to address various failure modes and backing it up with operations for the operators, like in this case, having a buddy system to make sure that situations like that can be handled. How do you exercise up in space? You got to exercise. Here's a Marine doing one-arm push-ups. Check it out. No arm push-ups. Obviously, you cannot use gravity as a resistant force to exercise in space. So we had a bicycle ergometer that we could pedal on to get exercise on the space shuttle. Now, the International Space Station, I'm sure, has a much more extensive gym equipment up there to make sure you stay in shape. On the shuttle missions, they were all very short. It wasn't that big of a deal to stay in shape up there. Whereas on an International Space Station, you're up there for months and months and months. You want to be very rigorous about exercise so you're prepared to live in gravity when you get back. How do you shave up there? Regular electric razor like some of you might use. The mirror I'm looking at is a shiny piece of aluminum. You would not want to have glass, obviously, up in the cockpit. How do you brush your teeth? He's squirting his water in his mouth to do that. We use a regular toothbrush and toothpaste, but there's no sink to spit the foam into it. So we spit it into a tissue and throw the tissue away. How do you bathe up there? There is no bath or shower. Water is very precious up there. It's heavy. You use a lot of it as a human. So you can't stand in well, obviously you can't stand, and the water is not going to flow down on you anyway up in weightlessness. So all you can do is wet a washcloth and wipe your skin off, as you see me doing here. Whoops, let's go back here. How about shampooing? Here's a woman shampooing her hair. They had some type of dry shampoo. You can see, obviously, that's a very bad hair day. Better to have my haircut than having long hair when it comes to shampooing and weightlessness. Here's a popular question. Actually, it's probably number one. The toilet's probably number two on how it works. So let me answer the number one question. Have I seen any aliens or UFOs? Yeah, I did. I filmed an Imperial TIE fighter going by my space shuttle. There it is. What else could it be? Actually, what is it? It's the International Space Station seen at a distance, but with those big solar panels and that central core, it does look remarkably like at a distance, like some TIE fighter out of a Star Wars movie. I've never seen any TIE fighters. I've never seen any UFOs. I've never seen any aliens. Do I believe there's alien life elsewhere in the universe? I do. The universe is so vast. This is the best guess scientists have made on how many stars are in our universe. When I see numbers like that, I just can't believe we're alone. I think there's going to be lots of alien civilizations out there. But that said, I don't think they've come to visit Earth, even in spite of these latest sightings that some of the Navy pilots saw and everything. I'm sure those are explainable in other ways. I just think that if they ever come, they will land and make a significant, unambiguous contact. I just don't see an intelligent civilization going to the trouble of flying all this distance to Earth, see the Earth teeming with life, and then only hover over people out in the deserts or someplace. It just doesn't make sense. I think it does make sense to me. Now, that's my opinion, folks. This isn't science. It's an opinion. Nobody knows if there's aliens out there. Nobody knows if they're visiting us. So you're welcome to your own opinion. That's my opinion. Okay, let's close here with a discussion on the future of spaceflight. The near future of spaceflight, of human space. I should have titled this Human Space Exploration. The near future is still the International Space Station. That's going to be up there for a while yet, and that's where a lot of science is being done. But on the horizon, in the intermediate horizon, if you will, is the Artemis moon mission. America's effort to send back, I'm sure it's going to be a joint American, ESA, Japanese Space Agency type of effort to get the first women and the next men on to the surface of the moon. And that's originally, it was going to be, I think, in 2028, around that. President Trump wanted to accelerate 2024. That's unlikely. It's easy to throw out numbers, but unless Congress backs it up with money, things like this don't happen. So I think 2024 is a dream. I think it's going to be further out than that, but it's in the intermediate range. Well, certainly you folks will be in your engineering prime when we next land on the moon. By the way, what's going to take us to the moon? It's the Space Launch System, which is a super Saturn V rocket that hasn't flown yet. Actually, an early version did, but the full-up system is not flowing. But they're getting ready to do that probably early next year. The central core, it has those giant solid rocket boosters like the shuttle did, but the central core of it, this gigantic gas tank with those 4 engines, those are space shuttle engines. The shuttle had 3 of those. This has 4. The solid rocket boosters, which you see right there on the shuttle, they had 4 propellant-filled segments. These have 5 propellant-filled segments. This is a massive, massive rocket that's going to have almost 9 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. And that's what's going to take us back to the moon and onto Mars. Mars is, the Artemis program, probably certainly within the next 6 years, I would guess, maybe a little bit longer. I think 6 years is probably a good guess on Artemis, that we'd have people back on the moon. But Mars is who knows, that they're talking 2040, but I think that might be a wild guess there too. It might even be longer in the future than that. But it'll be the SLS, the Space Launch System rocket, the Super Saturn V, that will be taking us back to the moon and ultimately onto Mars. Now, obviously, the big thing that's happening now in space is space tourism. That has exploded on the scene with SpaceX, with Blue Origin, and with Virgin Galactic. This is an incredibly exciting time. In fact, I think you folks, in my opinion, well, I'll talk about that here in a second. Let me do it now. Anyway, space tourism is really, really big, folks. I don't need to tell you that. You see it every day in the news. I want to tell you, there's an engineering lesson to learn from this space tourism and the way we've gone with privatizing low Earth orbit. And that lesson is beware of the syndrome. That's the way we've always done it. When you go out there in your careers, you're going to hear that. Excuse me. You're going to hear that expression. You'll maybe question why something's being done, and somebody will look at you and say, well, that's the way we've always done it, as if there's no other way. That's the only way that could be done. beware of that syndrome. I'll give you an example of that. How did we get to privatization of low Earth orbit? When the shuttle was retired, the Congress and President Obama at the time, 2010, decided that they would privatize low Earth orbit to save money. Think about it. Before we privatized space, back in the shuttle and earlier, NASA developed these rockets in-house at enormous taxpayer expense. They only flew a handful of specialized missions. Meanwhile, the taxpayer owned all of the infrastructure, all of the rocketry, all of the development of it. Huge, huge expense. So technology advanced to the point where it made sense in 2000, and I think it was 2008 that earlier than that, 2003, I think is when the decision was made to privatize low Earth orbit. But at any rate, people said, hey, why not let private companies develop their own rockets and capsules? We'll help them out with some seed money and some engineering help, but then they can use those rockets for whatever they want. They can launch satellites, communication satellites, they can launch tourists, they can do anything they want. It's a capitalism. They make a profit doing these things, fine. We at NASA will just lease the service that they offer, the capsules and rockets, to launch our own astronauts and space missions when we need to. So now we, as a taxpayer, don't invest these huge amounts of resources in the infrastructure, and in the rockets, and in the capsule development. The private companies have done that, and they're making money by selling it to, the space launch people, the communication satellite people, the military, space tourism, etc. Great idea. You think, it's a great idea now because you can see the results. But how did we astronauts think about it? What did we think about it in 2010 when this news came out that we're going to privatize low Earth orbit? Well, I'll show you in excerpts from a letter that was written to President Obama by 25 NASA legends. Now, I'm not a NASA legend, so I didn't sign this letter, but I would have signed it had I been asked. But I'm talking about the Gene Kranzes and the Chris Krafts and the Jim Lovells and all the legends of NASA signed this letter to President Obama. Here was almost universally the thought in the astronauts' minds about what this privatization plan was going to do. In that letter, they told President Obama, we see our human exploration program being reduced to mediocrity. The privatization of rocket development is a terrible decision. The sky is falling. This is going to be a disaster. And now fast forward 8 years into that, SpaceX has perfected reusing their boosters by landing them vertically, which has dramatically reduced the cost of launches for their Falcon 9. They developed a capsule that is now taking humans to the International Space Station. Folks, believe me, to have done this in 10 years is light speed in the world of rocket development, capsule development. It is light speed. NASA admits they were able to privatizing this. They were able to develop these technologies much faster than could have been done under the old model. And then, by the way, it is the cost savings that SpaceX is enjoying by reusing their boosters has a huge impact, a disruptive impact on the launch market. Everybody out there, the legacy carriers, are trying to scramble to catch up and be able to compete on price with SpaceX. I'm talking about the Russians, the Europeans, the American legacy carriers, the United Launch Alliance, those type of folks. They are struggling to catch up because of the savings that SpaceX is reaping and reusing their boosters. Here's a comment from Aviation Week. Their Falcon Heavy can carry twice the weight for less than 1/3 of the price of the nearest competitor. Think about that. If you could offer a service twice the service at 1/3 of the cost, you're going to dominate the market. So again, I want to take you back to these sentences out of that letter to President Obama. Disaster can't be done. It's going to end in disaster. And yet we're prisoners. We're prisoners of the syndrome. That's the way we've always done. How could there be any other way to put people in space except doing it the way NASA was doing? We couldn't see that. And that's why I say be very, very aware of the falling into that syndrome. That's the way we've always done it. Okay, because there couldn't be a better way. Speaking of another engineering lesson, kind of in the same vein, is the success of that helicopter Ingenuity on Mars. The engineering lesson here is be curious, folks. Initially, nobody thought this was possible to fly a helicopter on Mars. Why? Because on Mars' atmosphere at the surface is the equivalent density of the Earth's atmosphere at 100,000 feet. The highest any helicopter has flown ever in the history of the world is 48,000 feet, with half the distance to 100,000 feet. So if it hadn't ever been done on Earth, how could it possibly be done on Mars? That was the conventional thinking until a group of engineers said, hold it a second. Let's make sure that we can't do this. And they did some tests in vacuum chambers, sharpened their pencils and their engineering, and came to the answer, we can do this. And look at the tremendous success ingenuity is. So be curious and be curious, which is the opposite of that's the way we've always done it. You know, that's a good engineering lessons right there. Okay, I'm going to close with this slide right here. We're running out of time, but I hope someday this is one of you standing on Mars. You're living at a very exciting time in the space program. I'm going to, they'll post this stuff on the these lessons again on the internet here for you folks to go back and review. But I do want to implore you to take away those lessons right there, folks. And I'm going to wish you all Godspeed at this point. Have a great, wonderful life and do great things up in space. I can hardly wait to see some of you out there doing these great things. Take care. Bye-bye. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Mike, thanks very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to do it.
I
stopped share. You have it there? Yeah. Okay.
We've got here. I think I'll thank everybody. We don't have time for questions now, but we do have your questions, and we'll follow up with Mike and get some answers, and we'll post those when we can. All right, thanks everybody. Reminder, there are poster sessions that are happening now. You should have emails that have links to your Zoom session. If you have questions about the schedule on your poster session Q&A reviews, check our website at soundingrocket.org. Go to the events tab and there's the schedule there. All right, thanks very much. We'll stop the broadcast.
Bye-bye. Good luck.